Welcome to this bonus study guide episode of Chapter by Chapter Classics, the short-form classic literature podcast where each episode walks you through a few chapters of a great book. At this point in the season, we've gone through all 34 chapters of Wuthering Heights. This episode is a whole book review. We'll quickly recap the full plot, trace the main character arcs, explain the major themes and symbols, and suggest essay-style questions you can use for class, exams, or independent study. Full spoilers ahead.
So, imagine waking up in this strange oak-paneled bed. You reach out to silence a rattling branch at the window, right? And instead, you feel the freezing, ghostly fingers of a child close around your wrist.
Yeah, a voice just wailing through the storm.
Exactly, begging to be let in, saying she's been wandering the moors for 20 years. And your reaction, as this supposedly civilized guest, is to just completely panic and brutally rub that ghost's wrist against the broken glass until it bleeds.
It is such an incredibly visceral, violent entry point. I mean, we are thrown headfirst into a world where the boundary between the living and the dead, or the civilized and the savage, is just totally shattered.
It really is. And welcome to today's deep dive into Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. If you've just finished the novel and you're prepping for a final exam or structuring an essay or just gearing up for a book club discussion, our mission today is to provide a complete analytical wrap-up.
Right, because there's a lot to unpack here.
There really is. We are going to chart the full course of this Gothic masterpiece. So every dizzying plot twist, the complex arcs of all 10 major characters across 2 generations, and of course those heavy-hitting themes like obsessive love, class warfare, and brutal revenge.
Yeah, and to really understand the mechanics of this story, you have to look at, the board the game is played on, right? Bronte anchors the entire narrative around 2 central locations that function as opposing forces.
Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange.
Exactly. So up on the exposed, windy moors, you have Wuthering Heights. It's wild, it's stormy, defended by these jutting stones. It represents raw, untamed nature and primal emotion.
And then down in the sheltered valley, you have the Grange, which is, refined, civilized, heavily carpeted, and guarded by manicured parks.
Right. It represents polite, educated, wealthy society. And the tragic engine of this entire novel is the movement of characters between these 2 spaces and their fatal attempts to merge them.
Which is so interesting because we feel that collision immediately with the man who experiences that terrifying ghost in the oak-paneled bed, Mr. Lockwood.
Oh, Lockwood.
Right. So the year is 1801, and Lockwood is this wealthy, somewhat oblivious outsider from the South who decides to rent Thrushcross Grange. He goes up to visit his new landlord, a man named Heathcliff, at Wuthering Heights, and is promptly attacked by a swarm of angry dogs, gets snowed in, and is basically forced to spend the night.
Lockwood is, he's a tourist. He thinks he wants this brooding, gritty adventure. He even calls Wuthering Heights a perfect misanthropist's heaven.
Which is hilarious in hindsight.
It really is, because the second he is faced with actual messy darkness, like the ghost of Catherine Linton at the window, and then Heathcliff bursting in, throwing the sash wide open and sobbing for the ghost to return, Lockwood is just completely out of his depth.
He's totally useless. Which actually makes me wonder, why do we start the book with this clueless guy instead of the actual lovers?
Well, it creates this brilliant structure known as a frame narrative. Think of it as the ultimate game of literary telephone.
Okay.
Lockwood is an outsider who represents the normal, civilized world. So he gets sick, goes back down to the Grange, and asks his housekeeper, Nelly Dean, to tell him the history of Heathcliff and Wuthering Heights.
Right, so she fills him in.
Exactly. Nelly narrates the past 30 years of history to Lockwood, who then writes it down in his diary, which is literally the book we are reading.
Wait, so by the time the story reaches the reader, it's been heavily filtered. We are relying on totally unreliable narrators.
Oh, unreliable is putting it mildly. Lockwood misinterprets almost everything he observes. He literally mistakes a pile of dead rabbits for pet cats at one point.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about the rabbits.
Yeah. And Nelly, on the other hand, is intimately involved in the history, but she has her own deep biases. She hates certain characters, she favors others, and she actively hides secrets that drive the tragedy.
But filtering a wild Gothic tale of curses and ghosts through these 2 grounded, ordinary people makes the unbelievable feel documented and real.
Precisely. It grounds the haunting.
So let's get into that history, Nelly tells him, which takes us all the way back to the childhood of the first generation. It starts when the old master, Mr. Earnshaw, goes to Liverpool and brings back a starving, dark-haired orphan who speaks this, gibberish language.
Right, and he names the boy Heathcliff and brings him into Wuthering Heights, and this act of charity just instantly destabilizes the entire family dynamic.
Because Mr. Earnshaw heavily favors Heathcliff over his biological son, Hindley.
Exactly. It's an immediate disruption of the inheritance structure. Hindley is the legitimate heir, but Heathcliff basically usurps the father's affection. So when Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley inherits Wuthering Heights and immediately uses his new power to exact revenge.
He degrades Heathcliff, strips him of his education, and forces him to labor in the fields. Hindley systematically tries to reduce Heathcliff from a rival son to an animal.
But, and this is key, Hindley's cruelty accidentally forges this unbreakable bond between Heathcliff and Hindley's fiery younger sister, Cathy Earnshaw.
Because Heathcliff is banished to the fields, Catherine just joins him.
Right. They run wild on the moors, they skip church, they ignore authority, they become essentially two halves of the same savage whole.
But that feral unity lasts until a very specific turning point. Catherine and Heathcliff sneak down to the valley to spy on Thrushcross Grange, and they're literally looking through the window at the wealthy, soft Linton children, Edgar and Isabella.
And that's when a bulldog named Skulker attacks them and bites Catherine's ankle.
A huge moment.
Yeah.
Because the Lintons take one look at Catherine, realize she's a gentleman's daughter, and bring her inside to be pampered. But they take one look at Heathcliff's rough clothes and just banish him back into the dark.
It's a literal and symbolic severing of the two characters. I mean, Catherine stays at the Grange for 5 weeks, and when she returns to Wuthering Heights, she is physically transformed.
Yeah, she's wearing a beautiful silk dress. Her hair's all styled, and she laughs at Heathcliff, calling him black and cross.
She has discovered the currency of the Grange, which is social capital.
She realizes that her wildness has a ceiling, but refinement gives her power. And Heathcliff is suddenly made painfully aware of his own degradation.
Right, society has decided he is unworthy of her. And worse, Catherine seems to agree. Which brings us to the famous kitchen confession.
Oh, this scene. Catherine tells Nelly Dean that Edgar Linton, the soft, wealthy boy from the Grange, has asked her to marry him, and she has accepted.
And her logic in this scene reveals the absolute central tragedy of her character. She admits that she and Edgar have completely different souls, but says that marrying Heathcliff now would degrade her because of how low Hindley has brought him.
And Heathcliff, hiding in the shadows, overhears this exact sentence, feels the ultimate betrayal, and sneaks out into the storm.
He misses the whole second half of the speech.
He misses it, which completely recontextualizes everything. Because Catherine goes on to say her love for Edgar is like the foliage in the woods, time will change it. But her love for Heathcliff is like the eternal rocks beneath.
Nelly, I am Heathcliff.
Yes, that legendary line. I always think of their relationship like two massive trees planted way too close together. Their roots are so deeply tangled underground that they're essentially one organism.
Oh, I like that.
Right. If you try to uproot one and move it to a different yard, which is what she's doing by marrying Edgar, you are going to violently kill them both.
That's a great analogy, and the mechanism of her failure is her complete ignorance of 19th century society.
How so?
Well, Catherine genuinely believes she can marry Edgar for his money and status, and then use that financial power to elevate Heathcliff and save him from Hindley's abuse.
Oh, she thinks she can have it both ways.
Exactly. She doesn't understand Heathcliff's immense pride, and she also completely misunderstands coverture laws.
Wait, what are those?
So, once she marries Edgar, she basically ceases to exist financially. She cannot simply funnel Linton money to her childhood soulmate. The law doesn't work that way.
Wow. So Heathcliff vanishes for 3 years, and Catherine goes through the marriage, moving down to the Grange. Then Heathcliff returns.
Yes, and he is mysteriously wealthy, polished, and looks like a gentleman.
But underneath the fine clothes, he is dangerously savage. And here is where, honestly, I really struggle with the narrative. Because Heathcliff is undeniably the villain of this book.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, he hangs Isabella's pet spaniel on a hook. He physically abuses his wife. He is a monster. I know some readers romanticize him as a brooding anti-hero, but at a certain point, the whole childhood trauma excuse just runs out.
Yeah, but Bronte isn't asking you to excuse his actions. She's exposing the terrifying logic behind them. Heathcliff is a victim of a rigid, cruel class system that stripped him of his humanity because he lacked property and a respected name.
Right.
What makes his revenge so compelling isn't the physical violence, it's the legal violence. He learns to weaponize the very tools of the aristocracy against them.
Okay, let's break that down. How does he actually dismantle these two powerful families?
Well, he uses 19th century property and marriage laws. So when he returns, Wuthering Heights is still owned by his childhood abuser, Hindley.
Right.
And Hindley has become a severe alcoholic and gambling addict after the death of his wife. So Heathcliff essentially acts as a predatory lender. He moves into the Heights and funds Hindley's gambling addiction, taking the mortgages and deeds of Wuthering Heights as collateral.
Wait, so he legally forecloses on his abuser?
Exactly. He gentrifies Hindley out of his own ancestral home.
That is so dark. And what about the Grange? How does he get to the Lintons?
Well, Edgar Linton is protected by his wealth, but his naive sister, Isabella, gets a massive romantic crush on Heathcliff.
Even though Catherine warns her. Catherine literally tells her he is a fierce, pitiless, wolfish man.
Yeah, but Isabella defies her family and marries him anyway. And under those same coverture laws we mentioned earlier, marrying Isabella means Heathcliff legally absorbs her fortune and secures a direct claim to the Linton inheritance.
He doesn't just beat his enemies, he legally consumes their legacies.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the psychological stress of all this warfare just completely breaks Catherine.
Her husband, Edgar, demands she abandon Heathcliff. Heathcliff demands her soul. She locks herself in her room and starves herself into a delirium.
It's so intense.
There's that haunting, frantic scene where she's tearing feathers out of her pillow, hallucinating about the moors, trying to open the window to get back to her wild childhood. And she dies after giving birth to a daughter, young Cathy.
And Heathcliff's reaction to Catherine's death is just the rawest expression of his obsessive love. I mean, he doesn't pray for her to rest in peace.
Not at all.
He roars, "I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul." And he actively begs her ghost to haunt him, to drive him mad, just so she won't leave him alone in the abyss.
It is entirely selfish and completely terrifying. And you'd think the story might wind down after the female lead dies halfway through the book, but the machinery of Heathcliff's revenge just keeps grinding into the second generation.
It really does.
We fast forward, and the consequences are devastating. Hindley drinks himself to death, leaving his son, Hareton Earnshaw, entirely at Heathcliff's mercy.
And Heathcliff forces Hareton into the exact same cycle of abuse that Hindley forced upon him. He reduces Hareton, the rightful heir to Wuthering Heights, to a penniless, uneducated servant in his own home.
Then we have young Cathy, who has grown up sheltered down at Thrushcross Grange with her father, Edgar. Heathcliff realizes that Edgar is dying, and if Edgar dies, the Grange will pass to young Cathy.
Which Heathcliff cannot allow.
Right. So he literally kidnaps young Cathy and locks her inside Wuthering Heights until she is forced to marry his own sickly, terrified son, Linton Heathcliff.
It's just a masterstroke of legal cruelty. By forcing the marriage, Heathcliff ensures that when Edgar dies, Thrushcross Grange passes to Linton. Yeah. And because Linton is terminally ill and entirely controlled by his father, Heathcliff forces the boy to sign a will, leaving everything to Heathcliff upon his death.
So within a matter of months, Edgar dies, Linton dies, and Heathcliff has won. He holds the monopoly, he owns the Heights, he owns the Grange, and he holds the surviving children of his enemies, Cathy and Hareton, as his miserable captives.
Which brings us all the way back to 1801, catching up to exactly when Lockwood first arrived and saw the ghost.
Right. The timeline catches up.
Yes. The remaining cast is trapped at Wuthering Heights. Young Cathy is bitter and deeply miserable, and she takes her anger out on Hareton.
Like that scene where she mocks him mercilessly because he can't read the name Hareton Earnshaw carved over his own front door.
Exactly, because Heathcliff deliberately kept Hareton illiterate. He robbed him of language and education to ensure Hareton could never assert his own identity or claim his birthright.
And the tragedy is that young Cathy, by mocking him, is acting with the exact same class-based arrogance that her mother Catherine and the Lintons used against Heathcliff years ago.
The poison is still in the water. Bronte sets up this second-generation Cathy, Linton, and Hareton to directly mirror the first generation of Catherine, Edgar, and Heathcliff.
You have two boys and a girl, the Grange versus the Heights. It just forces us to ask, are these families doomed to repeat the sins of their fathers forever? Like, is trauma a permanent inheritance?
But the turning point for the second generation, unlike the first, comes through education and empathy rather than domination.
That's a great point. Because eventually, young Cathy regrets her cruelty. She decides to teach Hareton how to read. They plant a garden together, physically softening the harsh earth of Wuthering Heights. They actually find a way to communicate.
Yeah, and while they're slowly breaking the cycle, Heathcliff is unraveling.
Mm-hmm.
He has all the money, all the revenge, but he is starving to death just like Catherine did.
He stops eating. He wanders the moors, staring at things no one else can see.
He is finally reunited with Catherine in death, found dead in that same oak-paneled bed, soaked by the rain from an open window, with a savage smile on his face.
Which leaves Cathy and Hareton to inherit both estates. They intend to marry and move down to the Grange, leaving Wuthering Heights to the shadows.
And the novel ends with Lockwood looking at the 3 headstones on the moor, Edgar, Catherine, and Heathcliff. And he's wondering how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth.
A deeply ironic final thought from a guy who literally met a ghost in Chapter 3.
Totally ironic.
So if you're pulling all this together for a paper or a discussion, there are a few massive threads you really want to track. We've covered a lot of ground, but the way Bronte layers her themes is incredibly dense.
It really is. If you want to analyze the mechanics of the novel, I'd say look closely at Nelly Dean. A great exam or essay question to explore is how do Nelly's loyalties, her class position as a servant, and her active meddling in the characters' lives shape the narrative?
Because she isn't just a camera, right? She instigates a lot of the conflict.
Exactly.
I definitely want to look at the physical spaces, too. Like, the motif of windows and doors is everywhere in this book.
Oh, everywhere.
They constantly separate the wildness of the moors from civilized society. I mean, Catherine spies through the Grange window. The ghost of Catherine begs through the Heights window. Heathcliff dies with the window thrown open. There are just these fragile barriers between colliding worlds.
That's a huge motif to track. Another rich area for exploration is Heathcliff's motivation. You could write an entire thesis debating whether Heathcliff's revenge is driven primarily by his obsessive elemental love for Catherine or by a deeper, more systemic hatred for the class system that rejected him as a child.
Love versus class warfare. It really is both, deeply braided together.
Definitely. And that leads to a final thought I'd suggest mulling over. Throughout the entire novel, characters try to use texts to escape their reality or assert their power.
Like Catherine writing her diary in the margins of old books.
Right. And Lockwood snoops through those books. Young Cathy uses her literacy as a weapon to mock Hareton, and then later as an olive branch to teach him.
Books are literally everywhere.
They are. But look at Heathcliff. As a child, he stops reading entirely to become a brute. Yet, as an adult, he ultimately uses the most complex binding texts of all wills, mortgages, deeds, and legal contracts to systematically destroy his enemies.
Wow.
So the question is, does true power in this novel lie in raw passion or in paperwork?
Passion versus paperwork. I love that. That perfectly captures the dual nature of his revenge. I mean, he's driven by this wild, feral ghost on the moors, but he executes his vengeance with the cold, calculated precision of an attorney.
Exactly.
When you're reading Wuthering Heights, it's easy to get lost in the winds and the rain and the shouting. But what Bronte is actually asking you to look at is the structure underneath it all. How society denies people their humanity based on birth, and the terrifying, methodical ways that hurt people go on to hurt people.
The ghosts are frightening. But the inheritance laws are the real monsters.
They truly are. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning, and whatever you do, if a ghost taps on your window, maybe just let her in.
That brings our Wuthering Heights season to a close. You now have a full plot refresher, a map of the main characters, a guide to the major themes and symbols, and a few essay questions to help you keep thinking about the novel. Thanks for listening to Chapter by Chapter Classics. If this season helped you follow Wuthering Heights, follow the show so you don't miss our next classic. And if you're enjoying these short literature guides, please take a moment to rate the podcast or leave a short review. It really helps other readers and students find the show.